I'm David Haisman, the youngest son of Edith Haisman, who was a 15-year-old survivor on the Titanic.
My name is Eric Payne-Danson. I'm currently a tourist guide for the Southampton Tourist Guides Association. Of course, I've got a vested interest in Titanic.
This was a loss of ordinary people, working class people, you know, scullions and BRs, what they call bedroom stewards and what have you. But they would have held those jobs, and they were the ones that lost their lives, most of those. Down in the engine rooms, the greasers and the firemen and the trimmers, and a loss of over 500 young men in this town alone with their wives, being left without husbands and so on. It must have had a tremendous impact on them, you know, in this city at that time. And it's good to see around the town that there are aspects of that still visible, as a reminder to people here who live in this place that they should never forget just what went on that day.
When the disaster struck, the whole of Southampton was absolutely blighted. You had areas in Northern where every road in the street had the houses, each house had a death, or if they didn't have a death, the next door neighbour did. So it was a devastating effect. People that did die, of course, were very often commemorated in churches.
There was always that contact. Going to sea, they felt that this was gave them some sort of extra guidance, and they always thought that the good Lord was looking over them, I suppose, when it became difficult. Probably
one of the sad ones was Fred Wormold. Now, Fred Wormold was a resident in the suburb of Millbrook, and his memory is recorded on a plaque in the Holy Trinity Church, amongst with other parishioners. He left behind his wife, Emily, and 6 children, and they carried on the best they could. And then he was one of those that were drowned, and his body was recovered and taken to Halifax and the ice rink there, because that was the only thing they had for the quantities of bodies that were being returned. And what they didn't know was that a rabbi had actually taken about 10 bodies, including Fred's, and he's actually buried in a Jewish cemetery. Meanwhile, the White Star had informed Emily, and they were very good in that way that they took some of the relatives, close relatives, over to America. But when Emily arrived on the Olympic with her children, the Ellis Island authorities refused her entry because they said that she didn't have enough money, visible means of support. But when she got back to Millbrook, she'd found that the landlord had already thrown her out. All her belongings were put on the pavement, and he'd let her house to someone else. But that first night back, she stayed in the church hall and slept on bare boards with the children on the church hall floor. So that's one of the sad ones. There are many, of course.
The loss of the bellboys, the pity was they were only boys of 14 or 15. They all drowned, and when they got up to the boat deck, they were told to keep away, keep out of the way. They did say at times that it's only women and children for the lifeboats, which is a normal thing to do on a passenger liner. These bellboys were just children, but unfortunately they were crew as well, which meant they would have to take their rightful place in the boat after everyone else had found a place in the lifeboat. So it was sad that they were left behind.
local townsfolk, and with some cases, it's still, even nearly 100 years later, a sensitive issue, a personal issue. People lost relatives, and they don't really want to be reminded of it.
Mother and grandmother survived in lifeboat 14. Grandfather, he knew he wasn't going anywhere that night. He stood on the boat deck puffing away on a cigar, and he never took his eyes off of the ladies in the boat. Grandmother was shouting out to him, "Thomas, go around the other side and look for another boat. Get yourself into another boat," and he never moved. He never took his eyes off of them. But when they started to lower the boat down, my grandfather cupped his hands and he shouted down to the ladies, "I'll see you in New York." And of course, that's the last thing you ever heard of him. He was never seen again. But he, like many of the men on board, he knew that was it. He was going to have to take his chances with the rest. I've heard many stories from my mother. Sitting in that boat all night, she said when the ship was actually sinking, she never forgot those screams and cries for help. As the ship began to take her final plunges, she said, "I can never forget that." And that did haunt her throughout her life.
This is where what I would say was the hero of the hour, Captain Rostron. It was so important to not only David, but all the other survivors and descendants. He didn't question it, and he didn't stop. He made an immediate general turn in that direction and took measures that were to sort of, everything that could be done was done. He was pretty special.
He arrived at the scene and he managed to pick his way through the ice and picking up the lifeboats as he did. But once he got them on board, they went up an old Jacob's ladder into shell doors into the side of the ship. And Mother always reckoned her feet were frozen because she was sitting in that boat with water in the bottom. They were very cold when they got on board. And they were looked after with drinks of hot soup and rolls and so on. But to take their mind off of that, they were looking over the ship's side every time they picked another lifeboat up to see if old Thomas, my grandfather, was there. And of course he wasn't, he had drowned.
One of the things that struck me actually in the interior of the house was the fact how much Rostron loved the sea, because he even had his bay window, his front room converted, and the rockery looked like the bow of a ship, and so you can imagine him sort of imagine himself at sea even when he wasn't at sea, in his own house.
As I wandered around and looked around, I could feel that bloke, he was there, you know. I could feel that. He was there somewhere looking at us. And he was pleased to see me. I looked upon it as this is the man that perhaps saved my mother's life. That's how I see it. And without him, I wouldn't be talking to you today. Pretty sure of that. Things got bad 24 hours after. The weather turned nasty, and if they hadn't had a rescue ship there pretty soon, a lot of more people would have lost their lives, without any doubt. Yes, I think I owe a great deal to Captain Rostron.
When I was at school, history was absolutely dead and dull, full of dates, dead kings, and not the remotest use, as far as I was concerned, with anything that might apply to real life. But as an adult, I've come to realise that history really is made up largely of human experience. And it's all those anecdotes and life stories and life-changing events connect with people rather than things that make it so fascinating.
I think there's got to be a place. There has to be a place for those that once existed. They can't just be nothing anymore. They have to have had a purpose, and in that respect they have to be remembered, certainly. I mean, those 500 that died from the Titanic, if we go back to that, if they weren't on the ship wouldn't have moved. It wouldn't have got across the ocean in the first place. So they had a purpose, had a reason to be there. Yes, they should be remembered, certainly, without any shadow of a doubt. Well, it is something you grow up with, of course, and you realise it as it goes on with the publicity that comes with the movies. You begin to realise just how much of a big story it is. Many years ago, people just took it for granted. People like Fred Fleet, for instance, the Titanic lookout, who used to sell newspapers in the city. Nearly everyone spoke to him at one time or another, never gave it another thought. It's only now that they realise that Fred Fleet played such an important part on board the Titanic. It was never really published a great deal, publicised a great deal. Not years ago. It's the movies that's brought it up. To a lot of seamen in this port, it's considered as just another shipping disaster. There have been many bad shipping disasters throughout history where a great loss of life. I think what it is was the balance of the rich and the poor travelling together, and the class systems, some acts of bravery, and of course the North Atlantic, which was a very lucrative trade. With the ships going across there, that was quite a big business at one time, and it always wanted to, with the New World starting up in America as it was in those days. Everyone was going across to America, immigrants and so on. And what it has done, I think, it's brought it home to a lot of people that the Titanic, there were many lessons to be learned when it came to maritime safety at sea. Religion was very prominent, more so than it is today, and there were lots of people were very much church-going, and of course seamen were quite religious. Many seamen were quite religious, and they attended the churches in and around Southampton. Yes, you know, they had so many of these superstitions that tied in with the sea life, and these were quite evident at the time of Titanic, you know. They're very superstitious. A lot, some seamen really were. There was a bit of fear about weather and so on, and in the early days going to sea could be a bit risky. So it stuck with them because their fathers and their grandfathers before them could tell them some right old tales about the dangers of the sea, and they kept up their religions in that respect. I suppose some things you say that was meant to happen. I think we're all like that in one way or another. Something's meant to happen, and it usually does. Especially if it's driven by the forces of nature, it's more likely to happen. Some things seem to work out, if you like, that are meant to happen, you know, that's how I see it. With the Titanic, well, it was meant to happen in respect of safety at sea, certainly, at a great cost to human life. And it was done again, if you like, by Mother Nature. You cannot fool around with the forces of nature, if you like. She was there to prove that this iceberg had that ship's name on it. It was to destroy that ship, and days later destroy all the evidence that ever sunk that ship, as it would become just part of the sea. That was nature at work. There was no storm or tempest that night, no fog, beautiful clear evening.